Everyone is an artist. We are in the image of God, able to express with human love the divine love that made us. Art is a prayer, even if the artist does not pray. We are procreators, and God reveals himself when we are looking at the masterpieces. Viewing that which is hidden. At first, superficial glance, this painting by one of the great masters of the golden age of Dutch painting, Johannes Vermeer, may seem quite ordinary and commonplace, merely a somewhat haphazard scene of a little street in Delft. But soon, one detects a secret beauty in it. Vermeer has a special gift for giving us a glimpse of beauty in a fleeting moment of everyday life, thus almost imperceptibly linking time to eternity. True beauty is always a witness mirroring a fragment of the divine. As Pope Benedict XVI said, art is like a door open to the infinite, to a beauty and truth that goes beyond the everyday. This painting, though not explicitly religious, is nevertheless embedded in God's world. It exudes peace and serenity. It makes us aware that peace comes from humility. There are delightful miniature paintings within this painting. One of the woman in the courtyard with a doorway acting as a frame, and the other of the woman mending or embroidering in another doorway. The aged, cracked bricks of the houses in a warm russet brown have a special texture. Vines grow on the house on the left. The high facade and walls form a quiet enclosure. It is all suffused with a subtle enchantment. There is a connection with tradition in them. The cluster of houses suggests a whole community of families. The buildings are not beautiful mansions, but they do have individuality and character. The rooftops in the distance and the sky in the upper corner lift our eyes to the beyond and the wider vista. Far from the dissatisfaction driving our modern, frantic consumerism, they live in frugal simplicity, making do with the little they have. Out of their poverty, they are making a home, a secure haven for their children, who can then be entranced in their play. Doing these humble tasks links them to a whole world, hinted at in this painting, of silent contemplation that is almost monastic. Manual labor can be quieting and even creative. In the very act of working, they are glorifying God and bringing charity to their families. Thus, the lowly becomes a springboard for the heavenly. Women can create an atmosphere of love and harmony. Their influence on society is incalculable. It illustrates women's vocation of civilizing our world. In their hidden way, they are building up the body of Christ in this selfless serving, which includes real sacrifice. These women are performing the 1,000 little tasks that form a whole Christian civilization. She is fragrant beyond telling. The Virgin Mary is often depicted with a touch of cloying sweetness, sometimes too earthly and other times too ethereal. In this lovely painting by the Netherlandish artist Gerard Davy, she models with chaste reserve, without being distant. It brings to mind the words of John of Ford in the 12th century. He said, "She is fragrant beyond telling." She and the child have a supernatural aura, a purity about them. Fine golden rays emanate from the Christ child's head. He is the Holy One, the Messiah. Mary's high forehead and lowered eyelids, characteristic of Flemish depictions of the saints and angels, express contemplation. She is thinking eternal thoughts. There is also a subtle presentiment of suffering in her serious, gentle face, and even in the Christ child's face as he fingers the cluster of grapes, symbolic of the Eucharistic wine, that is, of his blood to be shed. The sensitivity of her hand over his hands and the grapes seems to offer reverent guidance as well as protection to her infant son. The other hand tenderly holds him in a motherly, never smothering way, with delicate deference, leaving him freedom, indicating that the son, similar to every child, is a gift and not a possession. Rather, he belongs to the Father. Aware of his divinity, she selflessly serves him. The flight into Egypt must have been dramatic and hair-raising, since the Holy Family were fugitives from Herod's intent to kill the child. And yet here they are, so calm and serene, manifesting the fruit of trust in God. The very realistic, peaceful landscape is an emanation of their beauty, harmony, and the grace of their souls. The donkey is the humble beast of burden. With his ears pricked forward, he looks willingly rather than ordinary. The basket bespeaks family domesticity. And unusually, young St. Joseph, beating a Flemish chestnut tree for food with his stick, has a humorous earthly touch without marring the sacrality of the scene, bringing the whole closer to us. He is the fatherly protector and breadwinner for the family. Though Mary is the lowly handmaid of the Lord, she is a queenly bearing, suggesting by her posture and by her mantle, its blue color mirroring the heavens, the trace of red foreshadowing her spiritual martyrdom, when a sword will pierce her soul. The mother and child have a similar auburn color hair and look alike. After all, he, the Word, was made flesh of her flesh. Though Christ pointed out that it is not the flesh which is important, but rather hearing the word of God and keeping it, no one did this more than Mary, who kept all these words in her heart. She is the Jewish daughter of Zion. She is the Jewish soil from which sprang the Messiah. The Virgin Mary was needed, who made available her whole person, that is, her body, herself, that it might become the place of God's dwelling in the world. The Incarnation requires acceptance. Only thus could Word and flesh become truly one. Since the earliest centuries, artists, poets, and musicians have tried to depict her gracious loveliness as the mystical rose. Psalm 45 says, "The King shall greatly desire thy beauty." And the new Ark of the Covenant, carrying within herself the Holy of Holies. The poetry and beauty of Mary enchant our hearts as she entices us as a gateway to heaven, as she points us to Jesus and she intercedes for us. They have no wine and leads us to Him. Do whatever He tells you. The Catholic ethos. In order to better understand the spirit or ethos which forms the Catholic culture, we can study the contrast between two great paintings. One that expresses that ethos and one that does not. Both illustrate the influence of that ethos or want of it in the world of children and on their portrayal. The first one, Las Meninas, the Maids of Honor, by Diego Velázquez, hangs in the Prado Museum in Madrid. The second one, The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd, by John Singer Sargent, hangs in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I'm not concerned with comparing the relative artistic merits. That would be like comparing rosebuds and daisies, but merely with trying to discover the spirit embodied in each, the atmosphere conveyed by each. Looking at the first painting, we see the Infanta, the Princess Margarita of Spain, surrounded by her maids of honor. On the left is a self-portrait by Velázquez. On the back wall is a mirror reflecting King Philip IV and Queen Mariana. In other words, the king and queen stand where we are, facing the Infanta, and the Infanta is looking at her papa and mama. There is a rich and variegated humanity here, all together in an unpretentious artist's studio, thereby demonstrating their footing in a basic human equality. Somehow, despite age, rank, and class differences, there is a common bond. The dwarf on the right takes part, as does the playful child on the far right, and even the dog. All are accepted and all are included. The tiny Infanta, Margarita, is exquisite in the glow of her innocence and in her poetry, in her lively eyes and silken hair, in the dignity and beauty of her dress. The maids of honor surround her like a bower with tenderness and reverence. The one on the left, with delicacy in the gesture of her hand, kneels in childlike attention to the Infanta, while the one on the right, with great courtesy, inclines toward her amiably. They have a refinement of manners that is graceful and natural. Mainly, this is the study of a child who is loved and cherished by all, and as a result is radiant, confident, and judging by the enchanting turn of her head, perhaps a bit arch and self-willed. One hopes she won't be spoiled. The light from a window shines on her, but it is as if the light shines from her. And there's a flow of love in the whole painting. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd by Sargent suggests the influence of Las Meninas, of which he in fact made a copy. A similarity can be seen in the large format, the figures in light and dark spaces. It portrays exquisite children, perceptively depicted by Sargent in their sensitivity and preciousness. Though charming, their prim white pinafores suggest a certain respectability. There seems to be uniformity rather than unity. In addition, he shows the marked disconnectedness between the children. The two girls in the background though near each other, are strangely detached. And in contrast to the meninas, one is leaning away, the other looking away. Each child is like an island in an empty space. They are isolated from each other and forlorn in an atmosphere of haunting melancholy. It is like an overcast sky. That flow of love, I would call it a fluidity of love, between them is lacking. That warmth and joy of the Catholic spirit, its wellspring and foundation, is the incarnation itself and the fullness of Christ's truth, His grace flowing from the sacraments, notably the Eucharist, and the communion with saints and angels, the sweetness of the Virgin Mary's smile, all of which make one more fully human, bringing forth a more ardent, joyful, and radiant love, and that fluid charity. Their eyes were opened. The great Dutch master, Rembrandt van Rijn, was a visionary painter, able to see into the deep recesses of mystery, as is the case in the Supper at Emmaus. He is able to convey so much more than a beautiful surface. In quite a unique way, he is able to conjure up an inner world, delineating the many facets of his humanity at various stages of his life. The truth about himself, his pride, his humiliation, his humor, his sufferings, his compassion, his aging, his wisdom, his greatness, and his littleness. This marvelous gift of disclosing an inner life, as well as his ability to project a world of divine mystery by means, for instance, of light and darkness, makes Rembrandt especially apt at portraying biblical themes where he combines realism with inscrutable mystery, as in this work. Whereas his earlier biblical scenes are dramatic, his later ones are more contemplative and imbued with a new pathos. In this painting, the monumental yet simple architecture of the background frames the scene, creating a sense of the grandeur and importance of the moment. The high arch, within which are hidden dimensions of light and shadow, adds to the atmosphere of otherworldliness. It is astonishing that the two disciples who met the Lord on the road did not recognize him, even when he explained the scriptures to them. And beginning at Moses and the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things that were concerning him. And they begged him, "Remain with us." And though in retrospect they realized that their hearts were burning, it was only when he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them that their eyes were opened. And this is the moment caught by Rembrandt. Here we see how the artist's genius penetrates into the mystery and draws us into its depth and meaning. We see Christ in his infinite tenderness at a banquet of love and intimate communion with his disciples. As with eyes turned to heaven, he broke the bread. The two disciples, in the company of an uncomprehending servant, are just beginning to be overtaken with astonishment as expressed by subtle and understated gestures. Blessed John Henry Newman writes, "A thick black veil is spread between this world and the next. There is no access through it into the next world. In the gospel, this veil is not removed, but every now and then Marvelous disclosures are made to us of what is behind it. At times we seem to catch a glimpse of a form which we shall hereafter see face to face. At Christ, the light of the world is radiating. The luminous white tablecloth, like an altar cloth, reflects his light. Rembrandt seems to be linking this scene to the mystery of the transfiguration of Christ on Mount Tabor. In both events, there is a sudden revelation of Christ's divinity in his humanity, and the disciples are amazed. Their eyes were opened, and they knew him. Above all, however, the breaking of the bread alludes to the Last Supper and to the great mystery of the real presence in the Eucharist, the Mass. Soon they will no longer see Christ with their human eyes. Christ is teaching them they must learn to recognize him in the Eucharist, and thus he will remain with us. Then the eyes of faith will be opened to reality and filled with indescribable light, light in darkness. It is the mystery of faith. Out of the depths I cry. Andrea Mantegna painted this panel of the altarpiece of San Zeno in Verona, Italy, between 1456 and 1459. The mystery of Christ's agony is described in the Synoptic Gospels. He went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, taking with him Peter, James, and John, the very same privileged ones who were with him on Mount Tabor and who witnessed the Transfiguration. Seeing Christ in glory was meant to prepare and to strengthen their faith for the time of trial. In this painting, we see Christ beginning his passion. It starts with a profound mental anguish. My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. He first suffered in his soul mental torments in solidarity with humanity. Many saints and blesseds, including Blessed John Henry Newman, have suggested that at that moment Christ saw in a vision all the sins of mankind from the beginning to the end of time. The offenses against God, the blasphemies, the ingratitude of creatures toward their Creator, the lusts, the pride. He had to bear the sins of the whole world. It was this that caused his sweat to become like great drops of blood falling down upon the ground. It was the beginning of the shedding of his blood for the salvation of the world. We see him here crying out, open-mouthed, with a groan coming from the depths of his soul, his hands raised in supplication. He, the eternal Son, takes on our nature to the point of making himself helpless, vulnerable. His closest disciples, who wanted to keep watch, have fallen asleep, sprawling here in a rather unseemly fashion, expressing that the flesh is weak. Seeing, however, that their spirit was willing and that their great sorrow caused their fatigue, he did not condemn them. The grace of redemption will raise them from their weakness. But at the moment, this weakness and this heedlessness by his beloved ones intensified his loneliness. At that moment, it seems as if no one on earth is sharing his suffering. The great loneliness of Christ is depicted here. Total loneliness is what theology calls hell. Judas, with his hostile forces, are coming down the winding, devious path from Jerusalem on the left. The beautiful city on the hill takes on the aspect of a hard fortress. The barren rocky mountain on the right is harsh and insurmountable. Christ is truly in the bitter valley. However, in his loneliness, there is one consolation. An angel from heaven comes to strengthen him. Christ prays, "Let this chalice pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." Mantegna pictures an angel bringing the chalice of suffering, thereby demonstrating, firstly, that it is indeed the Father's will that Christ drink the chalice, and secondly, that a heavenly consolation comes with the chalice. It comes from the Father. The tree in the foreground is split right down the middle, a symbol of creaturely brokenness after the fall. It will be healed. The waters from the spring is symbolic of life-giving grace coming down from Jerusalem fall on stones. Even so, the whole landscape takes on an unearthly beauty. It is a transfigured landscape. His hour has come. The world is at the threshold of a great transformation. A new light is dawning, the first traces of the dawn from on high, Oriens ex alto, are seen on the horizon. Already, the outskirts of the holy city are tinged by the distant light. The clouds are like angelic spirits illumined by that divine light, foretelling that Christ, by his suffering, is about to bring redemption.